Perhaps it's a dream for your own life, or perhaps for your family, or a dream for the UK, or perhaps a dream for whatever your country of origin is, or perhaps it's a dream for the whole world in which we live. And I think it's normal to have dreams for our own lives. I speak to people who dream of finding love, or dream of having a family, or dream of owning their own home, or dream of building their own designer home that they've designed, or dream of working for themselves, or dream of travelling to a particular place, or perhaps dream of doing something really meaningful in the world, or dream of having enough wealth to do what you want and when you want to do it. Have you had any of those dreams? Get any dreams like that? Because I have. I remember when I was 15, I asked God, I said, I don't want much, Lord, but I want to be a pastor, I want to be a husband, and I want to be a father. And 2 out of 3 of those God's helped me with. Maybe one day, long in the future, the third will come true. If not, we'll just get more dogs. But there are other dreams. There are other dreams too. There are some dreams that just seem crazy. I was walking along Goring Gap the other day, and there was the sparkling sea on the one side, and then there were these kind of £1 million houses on the other. And I was thinking, imagine living in one of those houses with a sea view like that. Am I on my own with this? Has anyone else thought about these things before? What if I win the premium bonds and get one of these houses? How great would that be? Last weekend, Jenny and I, we were in London, and we were in Trafalgar Square, and it was this big protest. It was a 3,000 strong rally of actually Iranian people. We have at least one Iranian person here today. And they were calling for the Iranian regime to provide democracy and to uphold human rights and to end all executions. That was what their protest was about. And there was music, there were flags, there were singing, there were people going round and round Trafalgar Square. And these were people who were dreaming of what their country could look like. They had a dream. Then in the evening in London, we went to Ronnie Scott's jazz club, and we went to see a drummer called Steve Gadd and his band. And Gadd is one of the most well-known and highly regarded drummers. I hadn't heard of him before I went, but I know loads about him now. And he was incredible, and his band was incredible. And I was just thinking, what place must it be like to be a 74-year-old musician who's played with Frank Sinatra, who's played with Paul Simon, who's played with, who else? With Eric Clapton, James Taylor, John Bon Jovi. And for many musicians, I think Steve Gadd, he's lived the dream. He has lived the dream. And so what's your dream? Do you have one? Is it a big dream or a small one? Is it a personal one or a political one? Is it something that you're working towards, or do you kind of see it as like an impossibility? Because some of us, we've stopped dreaming. We stopped dreaming long ago because we've been disappointed too many times. And so now we're not idealists, we're realists, and we kind of see the world as it is, not as it could be. And I've noticed some people around my age, especially young men, and they're lacking in motivation. You ask them, what do you care about? They don't know. What do you want? They don't know, they're not sure. What's your dream? They don't have one. Which is kind of strange, because my generation was a generation where we're told that you could be whatever you wanted to be if you worked hard enough. But we didn't become astronauts and pilots and musicians and sports people. And so when we get to the 9 to 5 and we're staring at the screen, we've stopped dreaming. So this is a sermon. It's a sermon for all the dreamers. It's a sermon for all the non-dreamers. It's a sermon for all the ex-dreamers. It's for all those people who want to dream again. Because I think it's so worth asking, why dream? Why bother dreaming? What makes a good dream? How do you keep going when the dream is unrealised? Do we need to dream bigger? Martin Luther King Jr. was someone who knew how to dream big. Could I have the slides up, please? He knew how to dream big. If we go forward a couple more. This one, yeah. 3.5 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit King's childhood home in Atlanta. It's the top left picture there where he grew up, Atlanta, Georgia, in the deep south of the United States. And I visited the church that he grew up in and then later pastored with his dad, Ebenezer Baptist Church. And I think it's quite nice actually, if you look at the photo bottom right, they've got a circular window too. You might have thought that was Worthing Baptist Church when you first saw that. They've got a circular window too. Now King, he was the son of a preacher man, and he was a Baptist minister himself. And so his big dream, it was shaped by the scriptures, it was shaped by Christian theology that he studied at seminary, and it was shaped by his real experience of growing up in a black church in the deep south of the United States. And he knew from reading his Bible that segregation was just evil. The segregation that happened in the south, the very obvious segregation, but also the subtle discrimination in the north of the United States too. They were evil. He knew that. And he knew that prophets speak truth to power when it comes to evil systems. And so in the summer of 1963, there was this great march on Washington, the centre of political power. And it was a march of 200,000 people, black and white, of every class, of every profession, of every religion. And they were demanding that there would be civil rights legislation that would lead to real life equality among normal people. And it was at that event where King delivered his I Have a Dream speech, the one that we heard a little clip from just then. I mean, I say speech, or was it a sermon? Because it was absolutely packed with biblical imagery. He paints these big, bold, and beautiful images. He says, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. Does that make your heart beat? Does that make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? When I hear those words, I think of the prophet Isaiah, when he talks about the wolf will live with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the goat. The big idea is that predator and prey, they'll live together, dwell together in peace and harmony. The sons of former slaves, the sons of former slave owners will sit down together at the table of brotherhood. And King, he dreams of this nation where his 4 children will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. He dreams of the day when the state of Mississippi, which he describes as being a state sweltering with the heat of injustice and oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. He pictures black boys and black girls joining hands with white boys, white girls. In our time and in our nation, this is kind of taken for granted. I grew up playing with people from different ethnic backgrounds and thought nothing of it. But for King, it was still a dream. For King, it was still a distant dream. Okay, here's something you need to know about King's dream. Because for King, his dream of peace and justice between black and white people was inspired by something even bigger. And this even bigger reality was what he called the beloved community. And this beloved community is a society of people who live together in the way children of God should live. It's the kingdom of God. It's the kingdom of love. It's where Christ-like love rules and reigns. And so the beloved community was Martin Luther King's dream. And he saw glimpses of this dream in the civil rights movement. And yet King's dream was not unique. We could say that King was dreaming God's dreams after him. King was dreaming God's dreams after him. And as we unpacked this reading from Ephesians, I hope that becomes increasingly clear to you. So if you still have those verses in front of you, Ephesians 2, from verse 14. If we can go to the next slide, please. It says this, for he himself, Christ, is our peace, who has made the 2 groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. And so the 2 groups here that Paul refers to are Jews, Gentiles, Jews and non-Jews. The ones with the law and the ones without the law. For Jews, it would have been the ones who knew God, the ones who didn't know God. And from these verses we find that the law, the many rules and regs that we find in the Old Testament of our Bibles, they were what separated these groups of people. And in the very early church, we find that Jewish Christian believers, some of the Jewish Christian believers would not eat with some Gentile Christian believers. Why was that? It was because of the law. Actually, Paul criticised Peter for exactly this. You can read all about it in Galatians. And so there was a kind of segregation, not loads of it, but there was this kind of segregation. Paul calls it a dividing wall of hostility. And in the original language, you get this kind of idea of a hedge or a fence going around a vineyard. So you're either in the vineyard or you're out of the vineyard. You're in or out, there's no grey space. Paul might have even had in mind the barrier in the Jewish temple that prohibited Gentiles from going any further. But we read in these verses that Christ comes to destroy that barrier, that fence, that hedge, that segregation. He comes to make the two groups one. His death on the cross reconciles Jews and Gentiles, human beings and God. So it's horizontal, it's also vertical reconciliation as well. So that they can all come together in one family, in one household. Then Paul goes one step further. He starts talking about the temple. And it's interesting, because he talks about temple not as a place of segregation, but talks about it as being made up, not of stones, but of people, of Jews and of Gentiles, reconciled together, God dwelling in them. So God's dream is a dream of reconciliation. God dreamt that the dividing wall would come down. God dreamt that human beings would be reconciled to God, their Father. And God dreamt that human beings would be reconciled to each other as brothers and sisters in the household of God. God dreamt of what Martin Luther King Jr. would have called the beloved community. But God knew that this dream wouldn't just happen. God would have to start things by laying his own life down in Christ. So this was a costly dream. A real costly dream. A dream that was worth struggling for, a dream that was worth sacrificing for, a dream that was worth even dying for. That was the kind of dream it was. I wonder, do you have a dream like that? A dream worth struggling for, a dream worth making some sacrifices for? In the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to offer 3 ideas. And in this church, we offer things gently and in humility, knowing that we haven't got it all sorted, but trusting that the Holy Spirit might even speak. Trusting that he might even speak again and again, and move in our hearts and prompt us to action. So 3 ideas. My first idea, dream big. Dream big. Should be up there. Dream big. Why? Because our dreams, they're often too small. And I can't speak for you, but my dreams are too small. They really are. They're too small because they're about the things that I want, or they're about the things that I want to achieve or want to see. And that doesn't mean they're all bad. Please don't get me wrong about this. Small dreams are not bad dreams necessarily, but they're too small. And if they're not about me, I find that often my dreams are about my people, my family, or my church, or my friends. But these dreams are still too small because they revolve around me and they revolve around mine. And I don't see that in Martin Luther King's dream. I don't see that so much in God's dream. A good dream is a big dream. A good dream that is more about we than it is about me. A good dream is one that's inspired by this dream of the beloved community, where God's love is lived out among brothers and sisters. And a good dream is one that pushes towards that reality. Now, of course, we might want to say big, question mark. Haven't we got to start small? Haven't we got to start with whatever and whoever is directly in front of us? To which I'd say, absolutely, yes, absolutely. But if we haven't got the big dream, we're going to run out of steam with the small things. And Martin Luther King knew this. That's why he kept speaking. That's why he kept asking what if. That's why he kept dreaming in public of a different way. Because he knew that without a big dream, his movement would run out of steam. In the business world, this is referred to as the BHAG. The big, hairy, audacious goal. The BHAG, the dream, coined by Jim Collins, the BHAG. Without the BHAG, without the big, hairy, audacious goal, you can't even do the small stuff right. Do you know what's powerful? When small actions are inspired by a big dream. Now, the civil rights movement, they wanted to bring down segregation everywhere. Everywhere. And yet they concentrated on the buses at first. And I think why the Montgomery bus boycott was so successful, it's hard to say bus boycott, isn't it? The reason it was so successful was because it didn't try and tackle segregation all at once. No, just the buses, but fueled by a big dream. Jesus came to reconcile all things on heaven and on earth. You can find that kind of language in Colossians, you can find it in Ephesians, and yet didn't he come to a particular people at a particular time, a particular nation? Didn't he die on a particular cross? And when he was resurrected, did he not show himself to particular people as well? And yet it was all for the big dream. Peace on earth and mercy mild. God and sinners reconciled. That was the big dream. You and I, we need to dream bigger. Will you ask God for a dream? Will you be so bold as to ask God for a dream? A big one. And I doubt you'll get your own. Like Martin Luther King, you'll probably start dreaming God's dreams after him. But ask him and start dreaming. And when you do, I think you'll start dreaming about justice, about reconciliation, about peace on earth, about living as brothers and sisters, about people hearing of God's great love for them. So please, will you ask God for a big dream? And then take steps forward towards that big dream. Which leads me to my next idea, and that's prepare for struggle and sacrifice. Prepare for struggle and sacrifice. Martin Luther King knew that his dream, the beloved community, it wasn't just going to happen. There would always be struggle. There would always be sacrifice. During the Montgomery bus boycott, when people stopped riding the buses to protest against segregation, many people walked. Some got lifts, but many people walked. But they didn't need to, not all of them. And one day a driver stopped beside an elderly black woman who was walking along with great difficulty. And he pulled up beside her and he said, "Jump in, grandmother." He said, "You don't need to walk." And she just kind of waved him on. I love this. She waved him on and she said, "I'm not walking for myself. I'm walking for my children and my grandchildren." And she continued all the way home from work on foot. Now, Martin Luther King didn't struggle in those kinds of ways, but he struggled in a different way. He was threatened relentlessly, his home was bombed, and eventually he was assassinated in 1968, aged only 39, leaving a wife and 4 children. He laid his life down for the big dream. Does that remind you of anyone? Jesus laid his life down for the big dream too. And you might see patterns, links between them, patterns of non-violence, patterns of prophetic, peaceful lifestyle, patterns of speaking truth to power, patterns of dying at the hands of power. Let me just change gear for a second here, because many people come to church and what they're looking for is real, authentic community where people genuinely love each other. It's not too much to ask, is it? Where people genuinely love each other. Are you looking for that? Because I am. And some people have left because they didn't find what they were looking for. But of course, what we can't miss is that we won't just find it. It's not something to be found. It's something to participate in. It's something we work towards, because the dream doesn't just happen. The beloved community, it doesn't just happen. It won't just happen. There is always struggle. There is always sacrifice. The question is not then, what's in it for me? The question is, what kind of community, what kind of church, what kind of family are we creating together? And how am I laying down my life for its sake? You know, with Mike's sermon in mind from last week, we might want to ask, what kind of world are we leaving to our children and our grandchildren? Will we lay down our rights, our privilege, our comfort to reduce our toxic impact on the earth? There's always struggle. There's always sacrifice when we pursue the dream. And without that kind of action, we can't even speak about dreaming, because it's just daydreaming. It comes to nothing. It's just ideas. It's just abstract. But this isn't an abstract sermon, because I trust that it will be fulfilled in our lives, in our action. One more. Number 3. Keep dreaming, because injustice anywhere threatens... Does anyone know the end of the quote? Injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. Injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. That was something that Martin Luther King he wrote from prison. Now, during Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, he focused well and truly on segregation and on racial discrimination, and rightly so. He was a brilliant leader, but it should be said that he wasn't perfect. And he gave very little attention to women's rights, and to be honest, he could have treated women in his own life better. But you know, he died at the age of 39, and I wonder if we can imagine what might have happened if he lived out his years. If he had, I reckon he would have kept on dreaming, because he knew, he wrote it himself, injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. And so just because we here enjoy relative peace in this country, discrimination is rare, and there's a whole lot of justice being done, doesn't mean we stop dreaming. There are people who are trafficked into the UK working for little, if any, pay at all. They're what are called these days modern slaves. It doesn't need to be that way. We need to keep on dreaming. In many families in the UK, both adults work full-time. But often in those families, the woman does the majority of the domestic work and the care of the elderly. That's not equality. And it doesn't need to be that way. We need to keep on dreaming. Did you know that in 72 countries of the world, same-sex relationships are illegal? And in 8 of those countries, LGBT people can receive the death penalty. Meanwhile, churches continue to bury their heads in the sand, holding very tightly to those verses in Leviticus that actually say you should be stoned. It doesn't need to be that way. We can keep on dreaming. Climate change, Mike mentioned it last week, climate change will impact the poorest people around the world, who are usually the least responsible for it. And those with the largest carbon footprints will end up being the most secure. Is that just? Is that fair? It doesn't need to be that way. We can keep on dreaming. You're called to keep on dreaming, because injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. Will you dream big? Will you prepare for suffering and sacrifice? Will you keep dreaming? Do you have a dream? Because God does. God dreams that you would be a dreamer. God dreams that you would be a dreamer with a big dream. A dreamer who will struggle and make sacrifices for the dream. A dreamer who will resist forces and systems of evil with the non-violence of Jesus Christ himself. If God dreams that you'll be a dreamer who can say with Martin Luther King, I have a dream. Amen.